This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
This is your before and after story. Instead of imagining a rewarding career in medical imaging, Southeastern College can actually take you there. Prepare for a career in ultrasound, radiology, and X-ray technology with hands-on specialized training, simulations, and real-life experience with the latest imaging technology. You'll be ready to play a vital role on any healthcare team. Transform your life by helping others. Southeastern College. Your future is bright. Visit scc.edu to get started.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome, folks. This is Steve Moore. This is the More Money Show on Red Apple Audio Network. Thanks so much for listening. If you're a new affiliate, because we keep picking them up every week, welcome. We talk about the economy. We talk about economics. We talk about finance. We talk about politics. We have a lot of fun on this show. We try to make economics fun. So thanks for joining. I am very pleased to bring on two of my favorite financial analysts in the country, Bob and Ryan Payne of Payne Capital Management. Gentlemen, thanks for joining as always. Boy, another tumultuous week with all sorts of signals pointing in every which direction, which is why I need to have you guys on the show to tell me where the economy is going, where is the stock market going, and what is the best strategy for making more money. So, Bob, I always like to talk to you first in terms of you've lived through the ups and downs of the market for decades. How do you assess this market today? Because I get a lot of calls from our listeners who are just nervous about things.
Well, you know what? The stock market always climbs a wall of worry, Steve. And of course,
that's a good way to put it.
It truly does. And, one of the bricks in the wall that was taken off today was Jerome Powell's comments, where he's now open to cutting interest rates because of the job market. Mm-hmm. So that takes a little uncertainty away. Mm-hmm. And actually it was kind of surprising, that he was, so overtly dovish. But that's what happens in a big booming bull market, which we're in now. All the surprises come on the upside. So Ryan, this is
Ryan, do you think, what do you make of Powell's declaration that he's open to interest rate cuts? I've been kind of on the fence on this for the last few months because I always say I'm paid to worry about inflation, and I don't want to see another bout like we had under Biden. But what's your take on it?
Well, my non-economic take is Jerome Powell wimp? Did he just cave to the president, basically, strong-arming him into cutting rates? And I think that's part of it here because, let's face it, right, we still have another employment report. We still have another inflation report come September.
Right.
And I'm a little skeptical that the employment market's as weak as we saw last month, right? And we're not seeing any layoffs here.
Right.
And we certainly haven't beaten inflation. But to Bob's point, markets do love it. And I think if you're an investor right now and you're sitting in a money market fund, well, guess what? You got to worry that the interest rate keeps going down. So that's a lot of money that's pouring to the stock market. And it's a big, alarm to say, hey, if you're sitting with too much cash right now or money market funds or CDs, you got to make some decisions because interest rates are going lower.
So one of the big issues, Bob, that has affected the stock market and the real economy, obviously, has been tariffs. Free market economists like myself are not big fans of tariffs, but there's a big debate about whether these tariffs are affecting certain industries and whether they're affecting prices of things. How do you tell your clients how to kind of navigate the tariff wars?
Well, one of the things, Steve, that I always say is the market's smarter than everybody. And obviously the global economy has been able to circumvent the tariffs. I mean, let's face it, these tariffs there's a lot of accommodations being made. So, there isn't any blanket tariff. I'm sure these brokers at the ports are able to help, the ultimate consumer negotiate around these tariffs. So, the market's already told you that this is not going to be a big issue. You've seen China rally, you've seen Europe rally, and now you're seeing a big move in the U.S. market.
In the U.S., yeah. Well, once that it was announced by Powell, Ryan, that he was open. I don't know exactly how to interpret this, but I think he's saying he's open to cuts in September. The market really loved that. But is that just a temporary little burst, or do you think this is is this something that will last in terms of higher prices?
Yeah, I think it's for real because the economy, let's face it, even with rates where they are, is in pretty good shape. If you look at economic growth, it's accelerating, right? It's much better than the first half, tracking right now for the second quarter. Like we mentioned before, people have jobs. People aren't getting laid off. If you look at those wages, they are now growing over inflation, and that means people have more money to spend. And it's all about the consumer spending, Steve. I don't need to tell you. So I think overall, this just adds what I would call fuel to a fire that's already burning. So again, like if you've been procrastinating on your finances or trying to figure out what to do, like you can't wait. You got to make decisions here because clearly at this point, we have a relatively strong economy and we just added, some gasoline to that fire. So it's like you can't sit on your hands here.
I'm talking to Bob and Ryan Payne of Payne Capital Management, and it's bebullish.com, right?
Best URL that you can possibly type in.
That's a really easy theme to remember. So, Bob, Ryan brought up the case that this is a time for making some moves. In what direction? I mean, what do people do? I'll tell you what I'm worried about, guys, and I'd like your reaction. I just keep hearing from my friends in Florida and some other states that the real estate market is really capped out, that they're starting to see a real slowdown in purchases of homes. Now they're talking about at the high end, the $2, $3, $4, $5 million homes. But, we don't want to see a real estate crash. We know what's happened. We remember what happened in 2008 when that happened. And by the way, I'm not saying that we're on the precipice of a crash. I don't think we are. But how concerned are you about the housing market?
Well, first of all, Steve, we have at our firm, we have what are called the Payne Principles of Wealth. And one of those principles is all markets revert to the mean, which is simply, all markets have a correction. I mean, you look at the price of your home, everybody listening right now, look at the price of their homes, wherever it is in the country. We've had a huge increase in prices. Right. So, having a little consolidation, a little turn down should be expected. It's like a rubber band. A rubber band can't expand forever; it has to snap back. So I think that's going to be temporary.
But my point would be, I agree with you. But the question, of course, is this a temporary, little setback for housing, or is it the start of a long-term bear market for housing, Ryan?
I think it's more of a temporary correction because you got to remember the big theme here is we have an undersupply of homes, right? After the great financial crisis, which I still have scars on my back, Steve. We remember there was not a lot of building of homes for a whole decade. So if you look at supply right now versus demand, we're still short homes in this country. So yes, we get a price correction here because interest rates have gone up. You have to adjust to close to 7% mortgages, but you're just not going to get a big fallout like we did during the housing crisis because we had an oversupply. We have a completely different issue now. So that should keep, some sort of, let's say, bid under the housing market. But I think a correction here is definitely in order. They've risen so much over the course of the last couple of years, and now interest rates are a lot higher.
So given that kind of uncertainty about the housing situation, that's another reason that people use professional financial advisors like yourselves. And I have to say that, even when I was pretty bearish, you were bullish, and you guys have been more right than I have on the market. So do you continue to have confidence in the market, and what advice do you give it to investors?
The knee-jerk reaction here, Steve, would be to join you and jump in on NVIDIA, right? You know how much money you've made on NVIDIA. It's been a gigantic mover, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I'm telling you right now, there's a golden opportunity when you have interest rates come down. What really benefits are small company stocks. We're seeing the companies in the Russell 2000 up over 3% today. There's also a huge opportunity in international stocks because as our rates come down, our dollar weakens, and you're going to see the emerging markets and the developed markets continue to lead.
Ryan, we got 1 minute left. What would you add to that?
Well, first off, it's too hard to be this good, Steve. No, I appreciate you giving us props for being bullish the whole way through here. But I think what Bob just said, it's a golden age for income. And most of our clients are baby boomers. They're getting close to retirement. They're retired now. And let's face it, if you just buy the tech stocks or the S&P 500, you're getting no cash flow. Meanwhile, if you diversify that money right now, dividend yields are probably some of the most attractive we've ever seen. Valuations are reasonable. And again, you got to lock into some bonds here because the Fed's going to cut interest rates. So to build an income portfolio, you have the best opportunity ever, and baby boomers need income. So this is the time to do it. The stars are aligned.
Bob and Ryan Payne of Payne Capital Management. You can get a hold of them by going to bebullish.com. They've been bullish for a long time, and they've been right for a long time. So I would certainly encourage you to get in touch with them, folks. This is the More Money Show. We try to help you make more money, and I know Bob and Ryan can do that.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome, folks. This is Steve Moore. Thank you so much for joining. We are on Red Apple Audio. We are on every Saturday afternoon in most markets from 1 to 2 o'clock. So thanks so much for joining. Hey, got a lot to cover today, and I will take some calls, by the way. I love taking calls from you. 1-800-848-9222 is the Red Apple Audio line if you want to call in. And I want to ask you about whether you like or don't like this idea of the government taking ownership in private companies. Do you think that's a good idea? I don't. I don't want the government to be an owner of companies. I want the government to stay as far away from corporate America and business as possible. There should be a separation of business and state, just like we have a separation of church and state, in my humble opinion. But I'd like your opinion on this. Now, some people say, well, we need the chips industry and we need Intel, so we should take an ownership stake of it. Well, we're going to take an ownership of Boeing. Are we going to take an ownership stake of McDonnell Douglas? Are we going to take an ownership of the companies that make our submarines? I mean, I don't get it. I don't think that's a very good idea. I don't think the government should have ever given subsidies out to the microchip industry in the first place. It probably ruined the industry. So I'm against it, but I want to hear from you folks. What do you think? Should the government take ownership of Intel since we gave them all this money? My attitude is we shouldn't have given them the money in the first place. The government should not be in the business of picking winners and losers. And you know why? Because what the government almost always does is pick losers. They're not very good at this. We have very sophisticated and very well integrated financial markets that do pick winners and losers, but it is not politicians. They don't do a very good job of it. So I think that it would be a really bad idea if we had the government taking ownership in American companies. But I'd love to hear from you on this. The More Money Hotline, 1-800-848-9222. And I'll be taking your calls a little later in the show. 4 or 5 things I wanted to cover very quickly in this segment of the show. First of all, I want to let you know some very good news about the economy, which is a breaking news story just this morning, which is Canada is going to stop its retaliatory tariffs against the United States. That's a big deal. That means they're going to lower their tariffs substantially. And that's a victory for Trump. It's a victory for the United States. It's a victory for Canada, actually, that they're going to stop charging these enormous tariffs on our agriculture goods, our dairy products, our technology products, and our manufactured products, like our cars. So if this story is correct, and I just read the headline a few minutes before I came on the show, so it has not been validated yet. That's really good news for Trump's strategy of forcing other countries to lower their tariffs on us. And if that happens, I hope what we will do is then lower our tariffs on Canada. I think the idea that we have steel and aluminum tariffs is a terrible idea because that ends up costing more jobs. I talk to so many middle manufacturers who make things in the United States all over the country, and they say because they can't get the steel in and they can't get the aluminum in, they have had real supply chain problems and they've had to lay off workers. So let's bring the tariffs down. Mr. President, your strategy is working. Congratulations. Now let's get back to business and let's get the tariffs down as low as possible. Now, there's a very big debate that's going on. And maybe I'd like to take your calls on this as well, about this issue of who pays the tariff. Is the tariff paid by the importing company, from China or from Canada or Mexico or India or wherever the product comes in? Do they bear the cost of the tariff, or does the company that gets the imported products and sells them here in the United States, essentially the wholesaler or the retailer, or is it borne by the final consumer? You and I, when we go buy this stuff, is that tariff cost passed on to us? And I would say that that some of the cost is borne by each of the parties, and we don't know exactly what the numbers are. But the reason I bring this up is that Peter Navarro, who's the chief economist at the Trump administration, and someone I've known, and he and I are friendly, although we disagree on some of these issues. He really took a shot at me and said, "Well, Steve Moore is, not being patriotic, and why is he attacking Trump on his tariffs?" I'm not attacking them. I'm just, on this show, and when I write things, I just want to be a straight shooter. I just want to basically call the balls and strikes as I see them. And I'm going to tell you, folks, we have coffee tariffs. I talked about this last week. Guess what? You're going to pay more for, if you notice, coffee prices are up by about 19%. Why is that? Well, in large part because of the tariffs. So we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that tariffs aren't going to lead to some things that are going to be more expensive. Now, it might be worth it. It might be worth it. Pay a little bit more, so we're less dependent on countries that that are our enemies, like China. But let's at least have our eyes open on this stuff. So I'd like your attitude about this. Who do you think pays the burden of these tariffs? I'll be taking your calls on this in a few minutes because I want your advice on this. This is the More Money Show, and we will be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome, folks. This is the More Money Show. Welcome back. And so I mentioned that we were going to take your calls in this segment, and I'm pleased to say that the switchboard is lit up. So thank you all for calling in. I always say that we have the smartest listeners of any radio station and any radio show in the country. So thank you. Thank you. Before I get to the callers, by the way, I think there's one line open at 1-800-848-9222. And the question of the day is, are you in favor or against the government taking an ownership share at American companies like Intel? I'm against it. I want privatization. I don't want the government owning our American companies because they're going to screw them up. Just like that, we shouldn't have passed the CHIPS Act at all. That CHIPS Act was one of the worst pieces of legislation ever. And let's stop subsidizing them. Let's stop owning them. Let's not regulate them. I'm a laissez-faire guy, but I want to hear from you. I have one piece of really good news that I've been chomping at the bit to tell you about, which is this new report. And I hope, by the way, that everybody listening to the show is getting our Unleash Prosperity hotline every morning. A lot of the items that we talk about on the show come right from the hotline. And you've got to get this. If you want to be the smartest person in the room when you're having discussions about the economy or finance or politics, you got to get the hotline. And by the way, folks, this is the best part about it. It's absolutely free. I'm not selling you anything. It is absolutely free. Just go to unleashprosperity.com and sign up for free for the hotline. So the good news I wanted to tell you about is what is going on with energy. And so the story here is that for the first time in a long, long time, thanks to Donald J. Trump, we are producing more oil and gas than any other time before in the history of the country. How about that? We're back producing American-made energy. Our oil and gas, I'd like to see us increase our coal production because Biden shut down some of our coal plants. We need to use our fossil fuels because, folks, our demand for electricity is going to increase double to 3 times over the next decade. And if we don't do something about ensuring our supply of electric power, and we get most of our electric power today from natural gas and coal, we're going to be in big trouble. You're going to turn on the lights, and guess what? The lights aren't going to come on. You're going to want to use your air conditioning, and guess what? The air conditioner won't come on. This is a real threat to the United States. We have to ensure that we have a safe grid system, and it's not safe right now. It's not reliable. It's very unreliable, and it's very susceptible to terrorism. And then we have to continue to increase our supply of energy because robotics, artificial intelligence, data centers use enormous amounts of power. So I want to make sure that that's one of our top national security and economic security issues. We've got to secure our electric grid system. Now, let's take some of the calls. We've got some time. I By the way, we are live. We're in color. That's one of the reasons you guys listen to this show. If you listen to most stations, you're going to hear canned, commercials are just boring. We try to keep it lively, and we do it live. And let us go to our first caller, Michael in New Jersey. Michael, you're on.
Thank you, Steve. I'm calling about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The government took a huge ownership stake in them several years ago.
Yes.
And it was unwarranted. The too big to fail banks all gave their toxic loans to Fannie and Freddie. And Fannie and Freddie have paid them back immeasurably. And now they're hopefully coming out of conservatorship. What is your prospect for them?
Well, look, it's a good call. Thank you, Michael. First of all, Fannie and Freddie, I'm not a big fan of Fannie and Freddie because they were the biggest, they needed the biggest bailout of any firm in the country when we had the 2008 collapse of the housing market. We had to, by the way, all the people Fannie and Freddie said, we will never need a bailout. And they even had an economist from the Clinton administration saying it would be a 1 in a million chance that Fannie and Freddie would ever need a bailout. And guess what? They went under and we had to bail them out. I want Fannie and Freddie completely disconnected with the federal government. I think they should be totally privatized. That's what the government, the Trump administration wants to do. I'm fully in favor of that. Let them sink it or swim. And essentially what Trump is talking about with some of these other industries, like the chip industry, is to turn them into like Fannie Mae type of government-owned partnerships. I hate it. I don't like it. But let's see what Jay has to say about this. Jay, you're on.
Yeah, hey, Steve. Thanks for taking my call. About taking ownership of companies, I trust President Trump to do so, but I'm apprehensive, though, because, Trump's only in for 4 years, and although I trust him with these things, you'll have the government, which is almost always incompetent, running these things, and, I share your concern on that. And is
there a but here or no? Because all the points you're making, Jay, are absolutely correct. I could not agree more. And it really concerns me that we have so many supposed free market people who are saying, "Oh, yeah, let's let the government do this." Incidentally, folks. By the way, Jay, great call. Incidentally, one of the things that's made me really nervous about this idea of the government taking ownership of some of these companies is that guess who's in favor of this? Guess who's a big fan of this? Are you sitting down, folks? Bernie Sanders. About socialists. He said, this is a great idea, Mr. President. Yeah, let's socialize our industries. That made my spidey senses tingle when I heard that even Bernie Sanders is in favor of this because he's a socialist and he wants the government to take over our private industry. It makes me very, very nervous. I think we have time to squeeze in one more caller, Mr. Producer. Who we got? Richard. You're on.
Hey, Steve. Listen, if I was in the same industry, I would really detest the idea of being in competition with the government. I think that's totally unfair.
Okay.
Second of all, I think what they're probably looking to do is to pump and dump the stock. No, isn't that the ultimate goal here, and make a profit, as opposed to have a management stake in the company?
Well, here's the problem. There was a story today in the Wall Street Journal about how other companies now are trying to figure out what to do. For example, the company, is it fair that the companies that compete with Intel, like NVIDIA, are now put at a disadvantage because they don't get all this money from the federal government. And then they're saying, well, wait a minute, the government's going to become an owner. They're going to pick favorites. This is why I don't like this idea. I don't want the government putting their hand on the scale and pressing it down in the favor of one company versus another. And I don't want American companies to think that their major customer is Washington, D.C. No, it's the consumers. Make things that consumers want. And we have a very good example of why this is such a dangerous trend that is going on with this kind of what I call national industrial policy, where the politicians decide where the investment goes. We had a big experiment that under Joe Biden, when Joe Biden directed hundreds of billions of dollars to green energy, to windmills, solar panels, battery plants, and so on. Most of them failed. We're nowhere with solar and wind. It's not happening. There's still very much fringe forms of energy. The idea that we're ever going to give up our oil and gas and coal, God forbid, that would be an absolute disaster for our country. And yet, all of the people and all the companies that took the direction of Washington, like the car companies, they lost their foots. How about the fact that, the car companies Ford said, okay, since the government's telling us to build electric cars, we'll build electric cars. They lost $50,000 for every electric car they built. Gee, thanks, Uncle Sam. That was a great idea. Government is not a good director of where investment capital should go. And I could spend the rest of the show talking about one after another of these examples of where the government. By the way, Japan leads the world in national industrial policy, and so does China to some extent. But remember, some of us are old enough to remember 40 years ago when, oh my God, Japan is going to take over the world. They're taking over all the manufacturing. No, they're not. Our stock market over the last 40 years has gone up 40 times faster than theirs has, because we do not depend on government for these things. I think we could squeeze in one more caller, Mr. Producer, if we have one. Wendy, thank you for calling. Are you there, Wendy?
Yeah, I'm here. Oh, hey.
Okay, what do you got for us?
So listen, it depends why the government is bailing the company out. So, for example, back in the day when the government bailed out GM, from what I understand, because the government had a big holding in GM. So if GM went out of business, the government would have lost a lot of money.
So do you think that the government should have bailed out the banks? Do you think the government should bail out our auto companies? I mean, I'm not Wendy, I appreciate your call. I think you make a good point, but I'm against that. I don't want the government bailing out companies because they become dependent on government, and they also tend to take bigger risks if they know that there's a big parachute for them if things start to fall apart, and that parachute is the United States government. So what do you say about that, Wendy? Do you have any thoughts about that? Okay. So look, I want people to understand that this is a very dangerous process. The idea that the government get in bed with our private companies. I am against corporate welfare. I'm against business subsidies. We should have separation of business and state, just like we have separation of church and state. A free enterprise system allocates capital much better than the government does. We're going to take a quick break, folks, and then I'm so excited about this final segment. You got to listen in, because I'm going to play for you my segment when I was with the president in the Oval Office last week. And you're going to love this. It was an amazing experience, and you're going to hear all about it in a few minutes.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back, folks. We are live, and I promised you that I would give you this segment that we're going to play now for you. I think this is an amazing piece of audio that we've tracked down about my visit to the Oval Office with Donald Trump. This was about 10 days ago. We finally got the audio of this. It was an amazing meeting. I spent about a half hour with the president. He called an impromptu press conference about how much better all the data that I provided him with, showing how much better the economy did under Trump than Biden. I think you'll really enjoy this. And it was a great moment for me. I'm still kind of tickled pink about being able to be at the Oval Office with Donald Trump. Here it is.
Just a quick session with Steve Moore. Everybody knows Steve Moore with the Heritage Foundation, highly respected, one of the most highly respected economists and people that watch your money and know more about your money and your life than probably anybody I can think of. And I want to thank Steve for being here. I saw this today. They came out. What he puts out gets a lot of coverage, and I saw some of them, and then he had a couple of others. And I'd like to ask Steve maybe to discuss a few of these numbers that were just released. I mean, literally just released. And then we're going over and we're going to do Purple Heart. We have some incredible, brave people that I look forward to. So we're going to do that right after this. Steve, could you say a few words about the various charts?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I called the President because I had some very good news from some new data that we've been able to put together that no one has ever seen before, and I'll just very quickly go through these. So I was telling the President that he did the right thing in calling for a new head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, because this shows that over the last 2 years of the Biden administration, the BLS overestimated job creation by 1.5 million jobs. Mr. President, that's a gigantic error. And I don't know if she's, I'm not.
It might not have been an error, that's the bad part. If it was an error, it would be one thing. I don't think it's an error. I think they did it purposely.
Whether that, you may well be right, but even if it wasn't purposefully, it's incompetence.
Right.
Okay, so 1.5 million jobs overestimated. We have access to the some data that no one else does on what has happened month by month with median household income. This is based on unpublished Census Bureau data. It will be released sometime in the next 6 months, but we get an advanced look at it. And so I was telling the President, in his first 5 months in office, starting in January through the end of June, the average median household income adjusted for inflation for the average family in America is already up $1,174. That's an
incredible number.
Yeah.
Just came out.
Just came out. So that's a giant gain.
And if I would have said this, nobody would have believed it. There's your number. We're doing well.
So the next one compares, we finally have the 2024 data on what happened with real family income in the United States. And so what I did was I compared the record in Donald Trump's first term with the Joe Biden first term. And you can see that, by the way, these dotted lines here, Mr. President, that's COVID. So if it had not been for COVID, these numbers would have been substantially better. But even taking account President Trump's last year in 2020, we saw a $6,400 real after-inflation gain in income for the average family. And that compares with Joe Biden, which was a measly $551. So, Mr. President, you gain 10 times more income for the average family than Joe Biden is because of your policies.
And that's taken into consideration COVID, which a lot of times you don't have to do that. But I'm very glad you did.
We were almost 8,000 until
look
COVID.
At that number.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then we looked at which families did the best. And we have data from the Census Bureau that shows by income percentage. So the 25th percentile is the lowest income, 75th percentile is the highest income. And what I find fascinating about this, Mr. President, is every income group did better. The red is President Trump, the blue is President Biden. Every single income group did better under President Trump. But what's really amazing is look what happened under Biden. The lowest income group lost income under Biden. They were poor 4 years after Biden's presidency. No gain virtually whatsoever for the middle class. And the rich was the only group that did better under Biden, which is ironic because Biden keeps saying he was trying to get rid of income inequality. He made income inequality worse, not better. It was President Trump that reduced income inequality.
These numbers just came out, by the way.
Yep. And then finally, these are the numbers I just showed you in percentage terms. Mr. President, these are the numbers in dollar terms. So even the lowest income, 25th percent, gained about $4,000 in income. That's a lot for a lower income family. $6,400 for the middle class and almost $10,000 for the richest. So you can see every income group did better under Trump than Biden by a wide margin. That's the story.
I think when you look at them, they're all something, but this one chart really says it better than anything. If you look at this is great, but this chart is pretty amazing right here. All new numbers. Okay? So we're going to go now over to East Room, and we're going to celebrate some very brave people with the Purple Hearts. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, just to follow up on the India tariffs, do you expect increased trade negotiations, since you've announced the 50% tariff?
No, not until we get it resolved.
Mr. President, is your deadline for Vladimir Putin agreeing to a ceasefire still stand tomorrow? Or is that fluid now that talks are...
What?
Is your deadline still standing for Vladimir Putin to agree to a ceasefire tomorrow, or is that fluid now?
It's going to be up to him. We're going to see what he has to say. It's going to be up to him. Very disappointed. Yeah.
Does Putin have to meet with Zelensky in order and before you and Putin have to meet? Or
No.
Are you hoping
so you're willing to? That's actually important because President Putin said this morning he was pretty dismissive of this idea of meeting with President Zelensky. President Putin was.
I don't know. I didn't hear him.
For you to meet with him, he doesn't have to agree to meet with Zelensky. Is that what you're saying?
No, he doesn't. No.
So when do you think that means?
They would like to meet with me, and I'll do whatever I can to stop the killing. So last month, they lost 14,000 people killed last month. Every week is 4,000 or 5,000 people. So I don't like long waits. I think it's a shame. And they're mostly soldiers. They're Ukrainian and Russian soldiers, and some people from the cities where, missiles are lobbed in and you'll lose 35, 40 people a night, which is terrible. But no, mostly it's soldiers, and you're talking about, on average, 20,000 a month. 20,000 people are dying a month, generally young people, soldiers. We're going to, speaking about soldiers, we'll see you over for... Thank you.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. Thank you for joining us for our second hour. We're on live most weeks, 1 to 3 p.m. on Saturdays. And in our affiliates throughout the country, oftentimes people are listening to the show throughout the weekend. I hope you're having a wonderful weekend. So let me start out the second hour by talking about something that greatly concerns me, and that is this idea of corporate welfare or government-directed investment, which I think is a terrible idea. As most of you know, I'm a big fan of Donald Trump. I think what he's done for our country in the first 7 months or 8 months now of his presidency have been astonishing and amazing. And I feel so good about where our country is headed right now. So you all know that I'm a big fan of this president. I've advised him on the economy on and off now for 9 years. Sometimes he takes my advice, sometimes he doesn't. But if I were directly advising him now, I would say, don't do this Intel deal. Don't do it. Now, Intel, of course, is one of our biggest chip producers in America. We're talking about not potato chips, we're talking about microchips. And people think that this is important for our national security, that we have a vibrant microchip industry, because the microchip, of course, is the brain center of the computer. But I am against the government giving them $10 billion. I just think it's outrageous. I think it is contrary to the whole free market system that most of us believe in. If you're listening to the show, you probably believe in the free enterprise system. And it never works. It just never works. This idea of national industrial policy where the government is directing investment is just been a failure every time we've tried it. We tried it in the 70s. It didn't work. Japan tried it, and for a while it worked, and then their economy crashed, and we used our efficient capital markets to allocate capital and money to the highest value-added uses, and that's led to one of the great booms in wealth creation and prosperity in the history of the world. And now we're veering away from this, and basically what Trump is saying now is the government. Then when we say the government, I'm talking about you and me and everybody listening to this show, anybody who pays taxes, your tax dollars will go to Intel. And wait a minute, I don't want my tax dollars going to Intel. I want them for roads and bridges and schools and things like that, but I don't want them going to private companies. And then what Trump is saying is, okay, if we're going to give Intel $10 billion, we're going to take an ownership share in the company. Huh? No, we don't want that. We don't want the government to be an owner of our private companies. That's a terrible idea, in my humble opinion. Some of you may disagree with me, and we should talk about that next week when I take your calls. But no, I think it's a horrible idea. The government, and by the way, if the government becomes a quote investor in these companies, what do you think it's going to do? It's going to put all sorts of regulations on the businesses. It's going to say you have to hire a certain number of blacks and women and Hispanics, and you're going to have to have all these rules in terms of what you do with your money. We don't want politicians to make those decisions because politicians are not very good at it. In fact, they're terrible at it. So we do not want to have the government investing in our companies. That's the opposite of privatization. We want the government not to be owning the means of production of our society. We don't want the government to own the means of production. This is socialism. This is what fascism is, where the government owns the means of the production of private enterprise. And that is a wrong direction. By the way, I don't like accusing any being a fascist, but this is essentially the element of fascism is government control of private industry. So let's not do that, Mr. President. Let's cut tax rates as you have done so effectively, lower the rates for everybody, create a level playing field, and I guarantee you we will have a vibrant chip industry, we'll have a vibrant artificial intelligence industry, we'll have a vibrant robotics industry, we'll have a very robust manufacturing industry. It's coming back because of your tax cuts. That's the way to go. We do not want the government to pick winners and losers for a lot of reasons, one of which is the government picks more losers than winners, a lot more losers than winners. But the other thing that happens is we saw this, for example, with what Biden did with the electric vehicles. He basically told the car companies, the American car companies, don't build gas-powered cars. You have to build electric vehicles. That's the mandate from government, from Uncle Sam. And guess what happened? Guess what happened as a result of that? We had the Ford lost, something like $50,000 for every electric vehicle they made because they started producing for the government, not for the car buyers. And the car buyers said, we don't want the cars you're making. So that's a good recent example of how when the government tries to direct investment from private companies, you get bad outcomes. How about the fact that the government under Biden directed $200 billion, not million, into green energy projects like solar and wind farms. And guess what? It almost all those companies, even with all the federal support, went bankrupt. So let's have separation. We talk about separation of church and state. Let's have a separation of companies and state. We don't want the government telling our great business owners and entrepreneurs how to run their businesses. And if Intel goes out of business, it goes out of business. Fine. It'll go out of business because it has crappy leadership. There are other chip companies that will take its place and we will rise again. Look, we have the 7 greatest technology companies in the world that blow away the rest of the world. We don't need the government being involved in technology. Now, some people say, it's a matter of national security, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not a national security expert, but I'm here to tell you, if you want a vibrant, profitable chip industry that makes great microchips for our computers and for our robots and for artificial intelligence and for the cloud system, we want it done by the private sector, not with decisions made by stupid politicians. So I feel strongly about that. I'm going to oppose that vigorously. And again, I'm a Trump guy. I love Trump. I love what he's doing. I think he's wrong on this. I think the Commerce Department is making really bad decisions here. We want separation of corporate America and our government. We don't want them to be intertwined. It doesn't work. And that is really scary to me because if we go down that road, you're going to have every single company in America coming to Washington with a tin cup in their hand. Gimme money. And no, that's not the way it's supposed to work. You go to private capital markets to get the capital you need. We don't want the government to be venture capitalists because I guarantee you we're going to lose a lot of money if that happens. The other thing I'm going to talk a little bit later on the show about that concerns me is we need to be building more. We need to really be careful about our electric grid system, folks. There's a report out that just came out this week that our electric grid system is not prepared for the coming demands on our electricity. When you look at the data centers, when you look at robotics, artificial intelligence, using huge amounts of energy, and we're not ready for it. folks. So wake up, because we're going to have blackouts and brownouts throughout the country if we don't do something to up our infrastructure and protect it. By the way, the private sector will do a lot of the investing. We should have never shut down pipelines. We should have never shut down our coal plants. We got to get those things back up and running so we're ready for the next 10 years, which is going to be the biggest thing in the next 10 years is going to be electric power production. We're not ready for it, so let's get ready for it. Okay, folks, great show coming up. I'm so glad you're joining us for the second hour of the More Money Show, and we will be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. Thanks again for joining. I wanted to have a political discussion about what's going on with the Democratic Party, because it seems to be in a bit of shambles, or certainly in disarray right now. And I am not a rah-rah Republican. As most of you know who are regular listeners to this show, I'm very willing to criticize Republicans when they're wrong, and they often are too. But the Democratic Party seems to have become derailed and a bit deranged, partly because of Trump. And so one of the best analysts of what's going on politically is a regular on the More Money Show, and that's John Fund. He works with me as the political director of our group, Unleash Prosperity. You see him all the time on Fox News, Fox Business News. He wrote for many, many years on politics at the Wall Street Journal editorial board, and now he writes frequently for National Review. John, thanks for joining.
Pleasure, Steve. Thanks.
So, John, you wrote something in the Unleash Prosperity hotline about some of the unbelievable statistics about what's happening with the Democratic Party, the decline of registration for voter registration for the Democrats across the country. What the heck is going on?
Well, lots of polls have been showing for months the Democratic Party's approval rating falling to the low 30s. But a poll is a snapshot in time, and it's what people feel that morning when they got out of bed.
Right.
The voter registration is much more important because it's conscious choice by voters of which party they feel most aligns with their views and their values.
Right.
We have 50 states, 30 of them offer people the opportunity to register by party. And that includes big states like Florida and California, and also a lot of small states. Some states
John,
aren't
let me
included.
just hold on. Let me interrupt you just a sec. So those states, when you register to vote, you register under a party, right?
Well, you don't have to. You can always register non-preference or independent, but you're given the choice to register.
Okay. And then these other 20 states, you don't register by party. Is that the way it works? It's just you just registered. Okay. Got it. Okay. I just wanted to understand that. Got it.
So of the 30 states, and this is the vast majority of the country in terms of population, of those 30 states, Democratic voter registration is plummeting. The gap between Democrats and Republicans has fallen by 4.5 million in the last since 2000.
Wow!
And of the new registrants, the people who are just joining up, Republicans are now outnumbering Democrats. And you find, for example, in states like Pennsylvania and Nevada. Now, these are two key swing states. Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in both states in 2020.
Right.
But in 2024, Trump won in both states, and in large part because people were re-registering as Republicans. So in some of these states, it's not just new voters that are saying we want to be a Republican. It's people saying, I no longer want to be a Democrat, I'm switching parties. That is almost a guarantee that they'll continue voting in their new party, and that is what is spooking and scaring the Democrats so much.
So when you look at the kind of standard poll question is, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? For most of my, career, Democratic voters have outnumbered Republican voters. Is that the case today, or where are we at in terms of just how people identify themselves?
In the 30 states where people are registering Republican, the gap is now down to 5 or 6 points, which is much smaller than it ever has been in the past. If you look at all 50 states, and we can only find out how people think in all 50 states by polls, that gap is just about the same. So it's happening everywhere. It's happening in red states. It's happening in purple states. It's happening in blue states.
So, I've always operated under the kind of rule of thumb, and tell me if you agree with this rule of thumb or not, or whether the rule of thumb is changing, that it's sort of 1/3 of the country is Democrat, 1/3 is Republican, and 1/3 is independent. Is that pretty close to the truth today?
Yes, but the Democrats have always had some kind of a lead, and that lead is shrinking dramatically.
I see. Right.
And what's even more concerning for the Democrats is the biggest drops in their registration are occurring among young people and Latinos.
So I want to get to that point in a minute, but before I ask you about that, because that's very important, because young people and Latinos are two of the fastest growing demographic voter groups. But our mutual friend, Adam Brandon, who now runs a group called The Independent, is telling me that, that the big surge in voter identity is that the number one party today is independent. Do you think that's true? Or he may be looking at different numbers than you are.
Well, it varies from state to state. And again, remember that in 20 states, we don't know how people have a party preference because they don't offer that. I would say if you shake people up in the middle of the night and say, what are you? More people would say independent than Democrat or Republican, but it would be close between all three groups.
Now, you mentioned so we basically have sort of three parties, and the key to winning elections, obviously, from those numbers, John, is who wins those independent voters, right?
Yes, although turnout also counts.
Of course.
And what we saw in 2024 is turnout went up overall, but Democratic turnout lagged. People were not very enthusiastic about Kamala Harris. And in lots of states, whether it's Arizona or whether it's Georgia, there was a real surge of new voters, and they voted Republican. Here's the irony. For many, many years, Democrats have been saying, we want everyone registered to vote. We want everyone voting.
Right.
And the New York Times, which had a front-page piece on this phenomenon of Democratic falling voter registration, they quote a guy named Andy Strauss, who's one of their leading data analysts, and he said in a recent memo that they got a hold of, we've been trying to register voters for years, but if we keep trying to register new voters, I'm afraid that we're literally destroying ourselves because more of them are going to vote Republican than Democrat. In other words, democracy, if you want higher voter turnout, means more people are voting Republican now.
Wow.
And of course, since Democrats are claiming that Donald Trump is trying to destroy democracy, this is called a conflict in messaging.
I would say so. It sounds like maybe they're the danger of democracy rather than the Republicans now. So
let's just say that democracy has decided that Democrats are the danger.
Exactly. So let's get into the why, because you've done a great job of diagnosing the problem for Democrats, that they're turning off a lot of these independent, young, and you said Hispanic voters. We certainly saw that with the rise of the Trump vote in 2024. What do you think? Why is it that they are not getting through to voters? Now, in our hotline, we wrote that we think it's 2 or 3 issues. One is the fact that the Democrats don't seem to have an economic growth message, John. A second one is that they seem kind of anti-American, not patriotic Americans. You don't, as I always say, if you see a flag in front of a house, it's probably a Republican household, not a Democratic household. And the third, and I want you to respond to each of these, is, and this is just my own supposition, that the Democratic Party was taken over by a kind of radical green element, which was basically saying, take away people's energy, take away their air conditioners, everything that saved the planet. You're going to have to pay a lot more for your electric utility bills. And Americans weren't buying into it. But do you think those are major factors? And am I leaving out anything?
Well, I think foreign policy may have played a role. Remember, under Joe Biden, we saw the Russians invade Ukraine. We saw the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and we saw the failure to respond to anti-Semitism on college campuses, which is related to foreign policy.
Right.
But I would say, remember, Democrats have masked this problem or have managed to avoid confronting this problem because at the same time that middle class and working class voters are becoming more Republican, they have been making gains among upper educated people. And remember, the majority of people now who get graduate degrees are getting them not in traditional fields like law and medicine. They're getting them in sociology and education. Witness Jill Biden's
psychology,
famous PhD in education, and things like that. So upper income people who already have the American dream, they're living the American dream, they seem comfortable with the country as it is culturally, and these, they're not concerned as much about economic growth or aspiration. Well, working class people trying to make it into the middle class, this includes recent immigrants, Latinos, young people who want to buy a house, they see the economy with a ceiling, and they want that ceiling raised. They want growth. They want opportunity. Therefore, they're viewing the Democratic Party with suspicion as stopping the growth of the middle class.
So the kind of turnoff of the Democratic Party for voters, would you say it is more economic or driven or cultural issues?
I don't think we have firm data on that. I think it's mixed, and for a lot of people, it's not one reason; it's a variety of reasons. And one reason is the Democratic Party. It seems to not buy into the story of America as a country that's exceptional, a country that wants to bring everyone under an umbrella, and it seems to want to divide people. So it has these various groups, whether they're the trans lobby, whether they're the woke lobby, whether they're the environmental extremist lobby. They cater to not broad appeals to the general electorate, but to small grouplets within their party. And people feel as if that they're uncomfortable with that. So I think that all of the things you mentioned are part of it, but it's also the fact that the Democratic Party is a coalition of special interests. The Republican Party seems to be more united around common purpose.
That's John Fund. He is the political director at Unleashed Prosperity. He is a frequent contributor to National Review, Wall Street Journal, Fox News. We're having a fascinating conversation about what's going on with in politics. We like to mix politics and economics and finance on this show. And so one of the real world's expert about the political scene in America is John Fund from well, you know him from many, many years at the Wall Street Journal. He's with National Review. He's with Fox News, et cetera. So, John, you were giving us a good landscape of what's going on in the country with respect to the Democratic Party and its fall off. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in New York and New Jersey, because big elections coming up in both of those states, and a big part of our listenership is in those two states. Let's start with New York. I am terrified, John. I am terrified that this Mondavi may win the election. And, some of my listeners, when they call and they say, well, this is what New York deserves. If they think that socialism isn't going to work, they should see it firsthand. But I really am very worried, John, that if New York goes socialist, that Wall Street will be gone, that people will really suffer, especially the lowest income people, if they chase out all the rich people. And I know a lot of people are ready to pack their bags if you get a kind of soak the rich new leader in New York. But how do you assess what's going on there, and how why is it, do you think, that there's this kind of romantic view of this socialist, communist Mondavi?
Well, we may be reading a little bit too much into it, but I do agree with you that the perception that New York could elect a socialist mayor may be more damage than any actual program that he enacts. Remember, New York has over 8 million people. Only 1 million people voted in the Democratic primary, and about 40% of them voted for Madani.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is it was a high turnout for a primary, but still only a small slice of the electorate voted. Independents couldn't vote in it, and Republicans couldn't vote in it. So now we go to the general election. Madami's opposition is divided. There's three candidates. There's a Republican, there's Andrew Cuomo, who lost the primary to Madami, and there's the incumbent mayor, Eric Adams. If they all stay in the race, Madami's going to win with less than 50% of the vote. So I don't call that a sweeping endorsement of socialism. Now,
well, it is not, but yeah, I mean, you're right about that. But by the way, just so everybody's clear, so there's basically, so Madami is the Democratic, he's got the Democratic line. Cuomo, is he running as an independent or?
He's running as a Put New York Forward Party. It's a label that you can slap onto your independent candidacy.
And then who is the Republican candidate?
Curtis Sliwa, who's founded the Guardian Angels many years ago.
I know Curtis. And then
anti-crime group.
And then Eric Adams, what party is he running under?
An independent line.
Okay, independent. So here's the thing that, John, as I look at it, and I'm an outsider. I don't live in New York, but I travel there a lot. I mean, you've got a failed mayor in Eric Adams. You've got a completely failed governor in Cuomo. And then you've got the socialist. And then there's a Republican, but there aren't that many Republicans in the city of New York. I don't see really, I would have a very hard time voting for Cuomo after what he did in terms of the nursing home scandal and the sex scandals and the way he mismanaged the state. So I don't know what I would even advise New York voters to do. Maybe go with the Republican. And by the way, we're not a political show. I don't tell people how to vote, but it just doesn't seem like there are a lot of good choices here.
Well, there's always the chance that as you get closer to the election and people pay more attention, it'll become very obvious that there's one or more candidates that are attracting support and some aren't. Right now, Eric Adams, for example, is in single digits. Should one or more of them drop out, the opposition to Madami, in theory, could coalesce and potentially beat him. And also, of course, remember, more stuff is coming out about his record. Here's a guy who rails against billionaires, but just had this blowout wedding in Uganda that cost several $100,000. And he lives in a rent-controlled apartment of $2,300 a month, which is less than half of its market rate. And this is a guy with lots of money. His family is loaded. So as more and more stuff comes out on Madami and how hypocritical and contradictory his positions are, his support may start to soften.
So who would you say right now is the primary? It would be the biggest threat to Madami winning the election?
The polls are divided, but I would say if you take the average of all of them, it would be Andrew Cuomo because he's certainly the best known. But
he's a disaster. He's a total disaster, John. I mean, I'd almost rather have Madami. I know it just frustrates me.
I'm giving you facts. You're giving me opinions.
I just don't understand how somebody as horrible as Andrew Cuomo, what he did to that state, could be the mayor. Okay, we've got just 2 minutes left, John. Let's change directions and talk about New Jersey. Here's another declining state where people are leaving in droves, high taxes, high property taxes, high income taxes, anti-business environment. What does the Republican have a chance to win that governor's race next year there?
Well, the Republican candidate is the same candidate who won 49% of the vote against the incumbent Murphy 4 years ago. Now, Murphy's term limited out of office. There's a Democrat who's running, Mickey Sherrill. She's more moderate than most Democrats are, but she also doesn't know a lot about state issues. She's primarily been interested in foreign policy in her service in Congress. So I think Citarelli, who's, the race is competitive. It's within the margin of error. I think he has a big chance because New Jersey, think about this. In the 1960s, New Jersey was a very prosperous place. It had no state income tax. It had
one
no
of the richest states in the country.
Tax. And property taxes are reasonable. Now it has one of the highest income taxes, one of the highest sales taxes, one of the highest property taxes. And people are squeezed. You cannot buy a house in New Jersey. You cannot do the little middle-class lifestyle in New Jersey because the government takes so much of the money and regulates everything. So I think people are fed up. And that's what we saw in the last election. In the middle of COVID, Jack Citarelli, the Republican candidate, got 49% of the vote with almost no money in his campaign chest.
That's John Fund, folks. He is the reason I have him on the show often. He's a frequent contributor to the More Money Show because he gives us great insights about what is going on politically in the country. John, last question. We've only got 30 seconds left, and I'm going to put you on the spot, okay? And you may not want to answer this question. Who do you think will be the next mayor of New York?
If current trends continue, it'll be Madani. But he doesn't have nearly as much power as people think he has. But the perception that there's a socialist running New York will drive people out of the city before the reality sets in, because the reality is not going to be as bad as the perception.
But Mamdani can be beaten, you're saying. He can be beaten.
Oh, he can be, but right now he's the front runner.
Okay, that's John Fund, folks. This is The More Money Show, and we will be right back.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks. This is The More Money Show on WABC and affiliates throughout the country. Hope you're having a wonderful Saturday afternoon. We are live, and we will be talking next to a good friend of mine named Brian Domitrovich, who's one of the top economic historians in the United States. He's a frequent visitor to our show and guest on our show, works with Art Laffer at the Laffer Center in Nashville, Tennessee. He's written several great books, including The Iconoclasts, about the supply side economic growth movement that began under Ronald Reagan. And he also is the author of a book. I think it's the JFK and the Reagan Revolution. Is that the title, Brian?
Yeah, that's right. That's with Larry Kudlow. That's exactly the title.
Yeah, that's a great co-author to have, Larry Kudlow. So Brian is an expert on economic history of the United States, and I thought now would be a good time to re-educate everyone about why taxes are important and why cutting taxes is good for the economy, especially tax rates. So, Brian, thanks again for joining. Let's start with the kind of history, if you could, of the income tax. A lot of people don't understand. For the first well over 100 years of our country, almost 125 years of our country, we did not have an income tax in this nation. And then that was the 16th Amendment that created the
16th. Yeah.
That created the income tax, which I think was one of our greatest mistakes ever. But the income tax, why did we get an income tax in the first place?
We got an income tax in 1913 because the nation had exhausted itself over debating the tariff for 120 years. The tariff debates really kind of tore the nation apart. And so they devised an income tax via the 16th Amendment in 1913 to lower the tariff.
So hold on, Brian. Let me just stop you right there, because you said they devised an income. Who's they? Was it the progressives?
Yeah, yes and no. It was a big group. It also included a lot of rich. I mean, it passed by the arduous process of a constitutional amendment, which took 36 states back then. And the tariff debates had become so difficult that the proposition was, now that we've had an industrial revolution, we can have an income tax just on high earners, and they could basically pick up the nation's tax bill, and we can lower the tariff. What they should have realized, however, is that if they lower the tariff, that, of course, will have Laffer-Koerber effects, and you'll get more revenue from the tariff, and you won't need an income tax. So it was a big mess up.
Good point.
Yeah.
So the one thing about the income tax that I think I learned from your book was that when they debated the income tax, I think the original income tax rate was 8% or 7% or something like that.
7.
7. So, the most amazing thing that I learned from reading your books was that we started at 7%. The politicians who passed that income tax and were the big advocates of it said, "Don't worry, it'll never go over 10%." And then 10 years later, we were at 70%.
Yeah, 4 years later. Yeah, I'm actually skeptical of kind of like the official history that the exchange for the tariff is the reason we had the income tax. The income tax ended up being terribly convenient for a nation at foreign war, as the United States was by 1917.
Right.
And my suspicion is it was actually planners on the part of the United States who envisioned the need for a domestic tax engine, which of course the tariff was not. So I actually think the coming of World War I had a great deal to do with the rise of the income tax. Yeah.
And by the way, I believe, that being in World War I was a great, great mistake for the United States. We should never have been in that war in the first place. But I agree with you. It basically allowed the financing of America to send all these troops overseas to Europe and fight that war, which nobody even knows what they were fighting about to this day. But
the tariff revenue dried up immediately in August 1914. So it was uncanny almost that they had just started an income tax the previous October.
So then this is kind of fascinating history, folks. I'm a history buff, so I love this. I hope you're enjoying it too. So we get the income tax in 1913. By, as you said, 4 or 5 years later, all of a sudden Woodrow Wilson, who I believe was one of the worst presidents in American history, he raised that tax from 7 to 60 or 70% or something like that.
77%. In 1918, it was 77.
So then we have the World War I ends in, I think, around 1919. And was there after World War I ended, did they lower the income? I mean, what happened after that? Because we had this huge income tax.
Yeah, so the top rate stayed over 70% all the way until 1921. It was 73%. 1919.
And by the way, we had a terrible recession, didn't we, in 1920?
Yeah, the Forgotten Depression, as James Grant calls it. Unemployment on modern reconstructions probably went to 19%. The price level doubled as well for the first time ever on a permanent basis, semi-permanent basis. Yeah, no, tax rates went absolutely crazy. And the one funny thing about that 73% rate, we talk about this in our book, Taxes Have Consequences, is that the left-wing economist, Emmanuel Saez, got a Harvard honorary degree for saying that the optimal top tax rate is 73%, the Laffer rate.
Who said that?
Emmanuel Saez, the big prize-winning economist.
Oh, right, right.
He says he has an equation showing that the only time we've had a 73% rate, it was absolutely destructive of revenue, and we had the highest debt ever.
So we have so continuing with our history lesson here, folks. So we have that 70% plus income tax. Then we get Harding wins the election in 1920. I always have believed he was a very underrated president. The historians always rate him as one of our worst presidents, but he was one of the first advocates of an income tax reduction, was he not?
Absolutely. He brought in Andrew Mellon as Secretary of the Treasury, and over legislation over the next 4 years, so Harding and then Coolidge, because Harding died in office in 1923, the top rate of that income tax went down from 73 to 25%.
Wait, whoa, hold on. 73% to 25%?
Yeah, absolutely precipitous decline.
Oh, my God. 73 to 25%. Now, here is the crucial question for you, Brian Dimitrovich. I'm talking to Brian Dimitrovich, who works with Arthur Laffer, one of the great economic historians. Okay, Brian, are you ready? Are you sitting down and you've got your think cap on? All right.
You got
what happened to federal tax revenues after we cut the income tax rate from 73% to 25%?
Well, splendiferous things. I mean, at the top, tax payments just soared. I mean, because tax sheltering just came out of the woodwork big time in the late teens. So the United States ran a budget surplus every single year, 11 straight years, 1920 to 1930. And that was under the conditions of having the largest debt ever in American history. So there was just this consistent paying off of debt under the conditions of radically lowering the top tax rate. It actually is the single greatest example of reducing debt by tax rate, but by any means, and it's by tax rate cuts at the top.
So we saw a more than doubling of tax revenues, even though the tax rate was cut by over half, by 2/3.
Yeah. By 2/3.
That's amazing.
And the threshold for paying taxes went way up. So it really became a high earner tax and much lower at the top. I mean, radically lower than it had been.
Okay, so let's continue with. So we have the income tax under Woodrow Wilson. It causes a mini Great Depression in the economy in 1920. Then we get Harding and we get Coolidge. They cut the tax rate. The economy. We had the Roaring '20s, right? The great boom in the American economy. And then what happens? And then we get a Great Depression. How'd that happen? How'd the stock market crash happen?
Yeah, I believe that it was Herbert Hoover's decision in late 19th, the President 1929 decision with that 10th straight year of surplus not to have another round of tax rate cuts at the top, but rather to have a tax rebate. He made that decision in late 1929. This Andrew Mellon, his Treasury Secretary, his plan to keep reducing that top tax rate has come to an end, and now we'll only have retroactive tax rates. So right there in 1929, Herbert Hoover announced, for all intents and purposes, that the floor of the top tax rate is 25%. I actually think that is the decision that caused the Great Depression, because from then on, with full certainty, as it turned out, global investors knew that high income will be taxed at minimum 25% from that moment on in 1929. And boy, were they right. Within a few years, the top tax rate was 79%. And that just caused a suck.
And did that happen? So with the rate,
out.
hold on, the rate went from 25 to 70-some%. Was that under
Hoover and FDR? So
wow.
as of January 1st, 1932, it was 63%. And then 1936, it was 79%.
Wow.
And Hoover had telegraphed that in 1929, saying, we're going to stop this top tax rate cutting. We're running a big surplus. We'll have a rebate. That was the signal, and that caused the pulling of capital out because tax rates are going to be higher. And sure enough, they.
By the way, I hope you're all getting our daily hotline that we put out at Unleash Prosperity. It is absolutely free. It is a great source of information about what's happening with the economy, what's happening in politics. It's very popular with members of Congress and CEOs, and you should be getting it too. And I'm not selling you anything, folks. It's absolutely free. Just go to unleashprosperity.com. I'm in the middle of a fascinating conversation with Brian Domitrovich, who's one of the top economic historians in the country and works with Arthur Laffer. And I forgot to mention your book. I apologize. You've written so many books, Brian, but your most recent one is Taxes Have Consequences. And who is the co-author of that book?
Co-authors are Arthur Laffer and Jeannie Sinkfield.
It's a great book. And so we're kind of reviewing the findings of that book, which, incidentally, what we're talking about, what Brian and I are talking about, we talked about for the last 15 minutes on the show, you're not going to get this in most textbooks, in economics books. It's just not taught. And so what I'm trying to do for you is give you real history, accurate history about why, how taxation works and why high taxes can have such a negative effect on the economy. Obviously, you need taxes to fund government. But what Brian is telling us is that the high tax rates on, quote, the rich have almost always failed. And we've gotten through the 1930s. Brian, you were saying that obviously Hoover and FDR were complete disasters with a 11-year-long Great Depression. And then we have World War II. And we come out of World War II and we have a tax rate that was near 90%, wasn't it?
Yeah, the top tax rate in World War II is 94%. That went down to 82%, but also the filing statuses was changed such that all of a sudden half your income was only subject to taxation. So there were very significant effective tax rate cuts by 1948, including about of 30% at the top.
And so then we have the next big thing that happens is that John F. Kennedy wins the election in 1960 against Nixon. Kennedy ran on reducing tax rates, which is kind of ironic because he was the Democrat and Nixon was the Republican. So Kennedy comes in, he endorses, what was his tax plan?
His tax plan was to have an across-the-board 30% rate cut because the economic growth has slowed to the long term for 2.5%. And the top tax rate was 91%. Now, that said, total tax revenue was 16%. I mean, the corporate rate was 52%. The bottom income tax rate was 20%. The estate tax rate was over 70%. All these super high rates, government's only taking in 16%.
Yeah.
So there was just a culture of loopholes and deductions.
Yes.
I mean, tax sheltering was it. And Kennedy wanted the money out of the tax shelters and put into the economy more naturally, more organically. And he thought that would double the economic growth rate from 2.5 to 5. That's exactly what he got when he cut tax rates.
He got it. And so obviously that tax cut happened posthumously after Kennedy was assassinated in late 1963 when LBJ was president. And then we had a boom, right?
5%. It was the greatest boom. It made that. The only reason we talk about a post-war prosperity boom is the 1948 tax cut and John F. Kennedy's tax cut of 1964. That's where all the growth of that era was located.
So then we get to so we're having a boom. And then why did we have that lousy decade of the 70s? The 70s were one of the worst decades.
Yeah, mega tax increases to end the 60s. Lyndon Johnson started a 10% income tax surcharge, and then Nixon
in the more late 60s, right?
Yeah, 1968. So just a reversal. You know, the Kennedy tax rate cut had worked so spectacularly. Johnson decided to reverse it by tacking on a 10% tax surcharge. And then Nixon kept that surcharge for a couple of years, instituted the alternative minimum tax in 1969, tacked another 10 points onto the capital gains tax, which then when you went off the gold standard, that was unindexed for inflation. And the only thing he did was lower the earned income tax from 70 to 50. So for one tax cut, he had 3 tax increases. Then when you went off the gold standard in 1971, the entire system was unindexed for inflation, and the price level tripled, and that increased real tax rates phenomenally. And we had stagflation.
Yeah, so people got crushed by the bracket creep. More and more people were paying higher rates on their inflationary gains in income, and that was a disaster. And then, as to quote your and my guru, Arthur Laffer, the clouds dispersed, the sun came out, and God gave America Ronald Reagan. And then we've only got a couple minutes left. Explain to our listeners, and who we have some young listeners who weren't even around that. What did Reagan do?
Symmetrical to the 1920s. 1920s, the top tax rate was 73, went down to 25. When Reagan came into office in 1981, the top tax rate was 70. By 1988, he had it down to 28. Very symmetrical. And you had this long-term boom of standard 4-5% growth in the 1980s and 1990s under far lower taxes than had prevailed over the previous 50 years.
So, by the way, just so people understand, a 70% tax rate means that for every additional dollar you were earning, the government was taking 70, maybe 75%, depending on what state you lived in. So you were only keeping 1/4 of your money. So as Reagan said, why would people work? That people don't work to pay taxes to the government, and that's essentially what they were doing. So it was really hurting the economy.
Yeah, and the tax shelters. Rich people were finding all sorts of ways where they could hide their income. But when you have the people who are most adept at deploying their money, not deploying it in an economically efficient fashion, you'll have really slow growth. And when you cut the rates, all of a sudden there'll be a boom in investment and growth and jobs, and that's what he got.
So that's the story, folks. That is the story of the history of the income tax. It's a story of blatant, unforgivable mistakes. And yet here we are, Brian, just to round things out. We've got politicians like Mamdani in New York City saying, let's just raise the taxes on the rich. You got Democratic politicians who say, 50, 60, let's go back to 50, 60, 70% tax rates like Bernie Sanders and people like Elizabeth Warren. So it seems to me we have to keep teaching this lesson because a lot of people just don't get it.
In 1967, New York City implemented for the first time its income tax. 8 years later, it filed for bankruptcy. I mean, it's a very clear connection.
Well, I think maybe we should end on that, folks. So let's not have, if New York City raises its income tax by another 2 percentage points, it will be the highest tax place in all of North America to do business in. And that means, if you tax something right, you get less of it, Brian. Thanks for joining us, Brian. Great. We should pay you tuition for your great analysis of what happened. I hope even my liberal friends who are listening to this show get this message. You want a broad tax base, you want low tax rates so that you don't distort economic behavior and you get an economic boom. We'll be right back, folks. This is The More Money Show.
The More Money Show with Steve Moore on the Red Apple Podcast Network. More Money Show with Steve Moore. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, folks, for our final segment of the More Money Show on this Saturday. The kind of the last week of summer. Next weekend is Labor Day weekend, and we get into the fall and football season. Thanks so much for joining. On the way out, I wanted to mention one of the issues that has come up that involves me personally, which is tariffs. I'm not a big fan of tariffs, although I've always said I like these trade deals Trump is getting, and he has used the threat of tariffs very effectively. And that's been my mantra. And I love the deal he got with the UK. I like the deal he got with Europeans, bringing hundreds of billions of dollars of investment here. But I'm not a big fan of tariffs. Tariffs are taxes, and they make things more expensive. And so I've been kind of in a brouhaha with some of my friends in the Trump administration, Peter Navarro in particular, who tweeted something out the other day saying, Steve Moore's not with the team. And why is he saying that the tariffs are going to lead to higher prices? And the answer is because tariffs do. Some of these tariffs do filter into the higher higher prices that you pay at the cash register. It's just math. If you put a 50% tariff on something, some of that is going to be borne by the foreign producer. Some of it is going to be borne by the domestic importer, and some of it is going to be borne by what you pay at the end of the day, because we always know businesses don't pay taxes. They pass those taxes on to you and me, the consumers. And so I have a good example of, and Peter said, no, it's the foreign companies they're paying for it. And it is true, the foreign companies do pay some of it. And I'm just saying that we have to do the math here. And you are going to pay, if you're buying toys from China and we put a 50% tax on the toys that come in from China, and whether you agree with that policy or not, the person who buys those toys is probably going to pay a little bit more. That's the essence and nature of tariffs. So I want to give you a good example of this, which is coffee. We're now imposing 10 to 50% taxes on coffee beans. Most of our coffee beans come from South and Central America, most importantly, countries like Colombian coffee beans, and Brazil is a big exporter of coffee beans. We don't produce a lot of coffee here in the United States. We're just not, our climate is not ideal for growing coffee beans, but boy, the Central American and South American countries are great for it. That's why you get some of the best coffee beans are made in Brazil and Colombia. So my point is that we're now paying about 15 to 20% more for coffee. Coffee prices have risen, even though the inflation is pretty tame overall. Coffee prices gone up a lot. So you're paying more at Starbucks. If you buy a bag of coffee, ground coffee, you're going to pay more for that, 15 to 20% more. That's because of the tariff, not exclusively because they've had a drought in South America, so that's reduced the supply. What I'm telling you is this is a perfect example of what happens when you put a tariff on, that the consumers will pay more. Now, I'm going to leave it up to you, my dear listeners, to make your own decision about whether you're willing to do that. Do you think that's, to help America, are you willing to pay a little bit more at the cash register? And you may well say yes, and that's great. You're a patriotic American. What I'm saying, though, is we're not saving jobs here. I don't get the point of coffee tariffs because we don't make coffee in the United States. So in other words, we're not going to save jobs here in the United States. It's not like all of a sudden we're going to be planting coffee bean plants, because it ain't going to happen. So my point is, yes, tariffs do cost you more at the cash register, but they've also been fairly effective at getting these countries to pay fairly. I just want you to be, I want to be a straight shooter with you. Okay. I want to call the balls and strikes as I see them. And we should know the merits and demerits of these policies and not always just rah, Trump's always doing the right things. He mostly does the right things. He's done an amazing job, but not always. And I'm here as your host of this show to call the balls and strikes and tell you when I agree with his policies and when I disagree with them. And one of the reasons I like to take your calls, as I often do, is because I love to hear back from you about what you think. I hope you want to have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. We'll be back next weekend on Labor Day weekend. Have a great week ahead. And this is the More Money Show on WABC.
Thanks for listening to More Money with Steve Moore. You can hear More Money with Steve Moore Saturday afternoons at 1. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?